I watched my husband fall in love with a ghost not of this earth. I never hit my wife. But I've killed thousands of stories I could have told her. The kitchen was too quiet for a Tuesday evening. The soup on the stove had stopped steaming an hour ago, and the table remained untouched. 2 plates, 2 spoons, and silence in between. Adam stood there for a moment, keys still in hand, staring at the scene like it was a frozen frame from someone else's life. Julia was in the living room, eyes locked to her phone, her face aglow with that familiar blue light. She didn't look up when he came in. She didn't ask how his day went, and he didn't offer. Their greetings had dissolved months ago, replaced by a series of neutral gestures, a nod, a brief hum, the kind of non-language people use when they've run out of trying. Adam was 42, a systems maintenance technician in a mid-sized tech company. His job was predictable, his colleagues forgettable. But it wasn't the routine that drained him, it was the sheer weight of living alongside someone who had once known every corner of his soul, and now barely occupied the same emotional time zone. They hadn't fought in years. There was nothing left to argue about. Disagreement requires friction, and friction requires passion. What they had was closer to a ceasefire. A cohabitation treaty signed in silence. Every night felt like a rehearsal for a life that had already passed. Julia cooked, or sometimes ordered takeout. Adam cleaned, or sometimes didn't. They watched TV, separately. Shared a bed, distantly. The space between them was not measured in inches but in absence. They didn't touch, not out of anger, but because neither of them remembered how. Adam would lie awake at night, watching the ceiling, listening to the soft breaths of the woman who used to dream out loud beside him. He used to count her stories. The way she'd talk about silly co-workers, about novels she wanted to write, about the time she almost ran away to Paris. Now she barely spoke. And when she did, it was to her screen. He didn't blame her. Not really. She had adapted to the new silence. He hadn't. He still carried the rusted machinery of hope that someday she might turn to him again, not out of obligation, but out of genuine desire to know what was going on behind his tired eyes. The worst part wasn't the loneliness. It was the ritual of pretending not to notice it. That night, Adam left the food on the table and walked out again. The street outside was cool and dim, the kind of quiet that made his lungs ache with a freedom he didn't know how to handle. The stars above blinked through a hazy sky. Somewhere far away, someone was probably falling in love. Or out of it. Adam kept walking. And the stories inside him, the ones he'd never told, pressed harder against the walls of his silence, begging to be heard. It was almost midnight when Adam found himself walking with no real destination. The night was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that feels intentional. He wandered through the outskirts of the city, feet carrying him to an old park he hadn't visited in years. The lake shimmered faintly under the half-hearted moonlight, its surface barely disturbed by the occasional breeze. He saw her before he fully understood what he was seeing. A girl, no, a woman collapsed near the edge of the lake, her body curled inward like a question mark. Her long black hair clung to her face, and her bare arms trembled as though fighting off a chill that didn't belong to the air around them. Adam hesitated, instincts warring. He looked around, but the park was empty. She didn't appear injured, but she didn't respond when he called out either. As he knelt beside her, her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, he felt a jolt, not fear, exactly, but something older, deeper. Her eyes were vast, dark, and shimmering, like they held not just tears, but entire histories. "Do you know where you are?" he asked. She blinked slowly, her lips barely parting. "I don't remember." Her voice was strange, measured, like each word had to be searched for in a language not quite her own. She sat up slowly, and though her frame was light, he sensed gravity in her presence, like the air thickened around her. "Do you have a name?" A pause. Then, "Lyra. I think." He offered to take her to the police, to a hospital, to someone. She shook her head, barely perceptible, and looked past him toward the forest that bordered the park. "There's an old house, in the trees. I remember the silence there. Take me there. Please." Against better judgment, he helped her to her feet. Her skin was cold, not like someone standing in the night air, but like something that had never been warm to begin with. She leaned on him gently as they walked, but she seemed to know the way, leading him to a long abandoned cabin hidden under vines and shadows. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and memories no one had bothered to keep. She settled into a corner with practiced ease. Adam stood awkwardly near the doorway, unsure of what came next. He handed her a blanket from a dusty trunk, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, without prompting, she said, "You've been walking the same loop for 7 years. Your feet change direction, but your heart never does." Adam stiffened. "What did you say?" Lyra looked at him, not at his face, but through it. "You died 7 years ago. Not your body, but the part that used to dream. That part hasn't breathed since." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. How could she know that? He hadn't told anyone, not even himself. She tilted her head. "I don't hear words. I hear weight." Adam sat down across from her, not realizing how close he had moved. Her presence didn't comfort him, but it didn't scare him either. It disturbed him in a way that felt honest. She barely ate. He offered her water, bread, even fruit from a vendor on the walk over. She touched them, considered them, but took only a few bites, as though the act of eating was more performance than need. That night, he stayed longer than he meant to. She slept with her eyes partly open. Her chest didn't rise and fall. He leaned closer and saw no heartbeat, no breath. But she wasn't dead. When he left, the door creaked softly behind him, and the cool air outside wrapped around him like a question with no answer. For the first time in years, Adam felt like something was beginning, even if he didn't yet understand what. And deep in his chest, the old machinery stirred. Adam went back the next day. And the day after. He told himself it was curiosity, maybe even guilt, but deep down, he knew better. It was compulsion. There was something about Lyra that pulled him in with a force that defied logic or decency. Each visit unfolded like a confession. But not his. Hers. Yet, somehow, she spoke of his childhood with frightening accuracy: the shape of his father's belt buckle, the song his mother used to hum when she braided his sister's hair, the exact feeling of standing on the rooftop during his first thunderstorm, the shame and wonder mixed together. He never told her any of this. Still, she recited his memories as if she had lived them, too. "I don't remember things the way humans do," she said once. "I feel what you hide. What your own mind tries to forget." There was no physical contact. No flirtation. Nothing that could be framed or named. But Adam would walk home with a strange electricity running through his veins, his chest hollowed and then filled again with something raw, like breath on a frozen window pane. At home, Julia felt further away than ever. She would ask if he was okay, not out of care, but habit. He would say he was tired. She would nod and return to her screen. Even when he sat next to her, Adam felt like he was intruding on a life she had already begun living without him. Lyra had shown him something different, not love, not comfort, but resonance. She taught him to listen to the echoes inside his own mind. He learned to recognize the micro-emotions buried under his daily mask, the quiet envy of couples laughing on sidewalks, the guilt when deleting old voicemails from his mother, the ache of having dreams with no audience. She called it emotional frequency alignment. A bond formed not through words or looks, but through a kind of neural tuning, like two instruments vibrating at the same wavelength. Adam started writing again. Long-forgotten journals came out from the bottom drawer. His words poured like water breaking through a cracked dam. He wasn't writing about Lyra, not directly, but she was in every line. Every metaphor tasted like her silence. Julia noticed. She didn't know what it was, but she felt the absence. Adam's mind, his attention, his presence, it had shifted somewhere else. She asked one night if he was seeing someone. He said no. But when she asked, "Is there something you want to tell me?" he couldn't answer. Instead, he looked at her like she was a story already written, one he had memorized but no longer recited aloud. Julia cried in the bathroom that night. Quietly. Adam stood outside the door and didn't knock. That same night, Lyra whispered something into the dark. "Your soul hums louder when you think of me." And he hated that it was true. Julia followed him. It wasn't planned. At least, not at first. But one night, something inside her snapped. The sound of Adam's keys, the way he slipped out without a word, like a ghost rehearsing disappearance. She waited 5 minutes. Then she put on her coat and went after him. She kept her distance. The streets were quiet. Adam didn't look back. He walked like a man drawn by gravity, like he was returning to something more real than his own home. When he reached the old cabin, Julia hid behind a tree. She didn't expect what she saw, or rather, didn't see. Adam sat alone. No lights, no voice responding. Just him. Talking. To no one. His face was softer than she'd seen in years. Like he was finally being understood. He gestured gently, nodded, smiled to empty space. And then, suddenly, his expression broke. He looked wounded and worshipful all at once. Julia's heart fell through her ribs. Whatever this was, it was worse than cheating. She stepped forward. Her voice cracked like dry wood. "You're in love with someone who doesn't exist." Adam turned slowly. No shame. No denial. Just that strange, tired calm. "No," he said. She exists. In every place you never followed me into. Julia didn't scream. Her voice had long given up such theater. Instead, she looked at him like a stranger, like someone who had worn her husband's skin but outgrew it quietly. "You're not even touching her," she said. "And still, I'm the one who feels erased." Adam didn't answer. He couldn't. His dreams now ended in that cabin, not in the bed he once shared with Julia. He had begun waking up with Lyra's name on his lips, dreams drenched in light not of this world. In those dreams, Julia was never present. Not because she had died, but because she had never belonged there to begin with. Julia left the cabin before he could speak again. Her tears didn't sting. They just existed. Proof that she had once mattered. Adam remained in the dark, staring at the empty space across from him. "MTNG," he whispered in the language of dreams. "But now you're just a dim reflection of yourself." And silence swallowed everything that followed. Lyra was gone. One morning, Adam returned to the cabin and found nothing but dust and air. The room where she once sat cross-legged, where her voice filled the quiet, where his soul had hummed, it was all empty. The door creaked the same, but it led nowhere. He searched. First in desperation, then in ritual. He asked around, but no one had seen her. No one remembered a woman like that. When he described her eyes, people smiled politely and stepped back. When he said her name, it echoed too strangely in the air, like a word from a dream trying to survive in waking life. The cabin was demolished 3 weeks later. Condemned by the city. Adam watched the wrecking crew tear through the walls like they were ripping out pieces of memory. No one else stood there to grieve it. Julia had already left by then. Her things disappeared one afternoon without ceremony. She left no note. He didn't call. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already turned to silence years ago. Adam tried to return to work, to routine, to something resembling the scaffolding of normal life. But everything sounded hollow. He moved through his days like a man wading through shallow fog. People spoke, but their words passed through him like wind through branches. Still, every day, he walked back to the park. Under the old tree where he first met her, he buried a small wooden box inside, folded pages of letters he wrote to Lyra. He never signed them. He didn't need to. They were filled with memories she had shown him, and questions he still whispered into the sky. "Did you ever exist?" he wrote once. "Or did I dream you into being just to remember who I used to be?" He didn't want an answer. Not really. The ache of not knowing had become its own kind of comfort. A bruise he could press to remind himself he was once alive enough to feel. He didn't try to heal. He didn't want to. Because in Lyra's presence, even if imagined, he had felt something more real than anything in the daylight. He had touched the outline of himself raw, unfiltered, unapologetically yearning. Maybe she was never flesh. Maybe she was just the last part of his soul trying to speak before fading completely. Not everyone needs someone beside them. But everyone needs someone who can understand their silence. And so Adam stayed. On Earth. Writing letters to a ghost that might never have been. And for him, that was enough.